fourfold the sons of Los in their divisions, and fourfold the great city of Golgonooza, fourfold towards the north and toward the south fourfold, and fourfold toward the east and west, each within other toward the 4 points, that toward Eden, and that toward the world of generation, and that towards Beulah, and that toward Oro. Oro is the space of the terrible starry wheels of Albion's sons, but that towards Eden is walled up till time of renovation, yet it is perfect in its building, ornaments and perfection. From Jerusalem, 12.
Hello and welcome to my little show on William Blake and his city Golgonooza. Golgonooza is a city created by Mr. Blake. It's regarded as Blake's vision of London and a reflection of Jerusalem. In his books where he describes the city, it is a city of imagination, and it's built on the character, or by the character of Los. It is a great city of art, science, music and poetry. I have with me today Henry Eliot, who's made a wonderful map all about Golgonooza, and we're going to start by discussing that.
Great, thanks Debbie, well, it's lovely to be here. And this is a great spot to be talking because we're sitting within yards of the remains of William Blake here in Bunhill Fields. His memorial stone is nearby, but we're near the actual spot where he's buried, so what a great place to be talking to you.
That's why I thought it'd be nice for him to hear us talk about this great piece of art you've done with, is it Andrea McLean? Or
Andrea McLean, exactly, yeah, the artist. So yeah, I teamed up with this fantastic artist called Andrea McLean, who's a fine artist. She's been described as a visionary cartographer because all her artworks seem to have elements of cartography and maps within them. She's very inspired by medieval maps, particularly the circular mappa mundi, which seem to attempt to encapsulate the whole world on a single canvas. And a lot of her images reflect that. And she's got a great interest in Blake, and she seemed like the perfect person to attempt a map of this kind of impossible imaginative city that Blake created in his writing.
Because this city's in Milton and Jerusalem, isn't it?
That's right, and it's mentioned in the Four Zoas as well.
Right. Okay,
and you're right, it's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, but you're absolutely right to say that it's a city of the imagination. It's a reflection of the spiritual Jerusalem, and it seems like, in Blake's poetry, it seems like building Golgonooza is the ultimate aim of any artist or creative. And so by coming up with new ideas, by creating works of art, everyone is contributing to this great city of the imagination. But unfortunately, as Blake saw it, as fast as it's built, it's being demolished by the forces of rationality, reason, containing that creative energy. And so it's a constant battle building this city, and it's something that we need to keep doing. Even now Blake's dead, we need to keep up the building process of Golgonooza.
As we had the building processes of London going on in the background.
Yes, you can hear it.
So
Perfect.
you pulled along one of your maps, and you were going to say it has to be opened in a certain way.
So this is quite a bad pun which is worked into the map. So Blake often calls Golgonooza the spiritual fourfold city, and we could maybe talk in a moment about why it's fourfold. But when we were thinking about how to present this map, we were thinking we're going to need to fold it because it's going to be hard to carry around otherwise. And so suddenly it seemed obvious we needed to fold it 4 times. So I've got here a 4-folded map of Golgonooza, and as you unfold it, the first side that is revealed is in some ways the reverse side, but it's certainly full of life and colour and isn't plain in any way.
It is very bright, isn't it?
It's very bright.
Blake would use with his colours.
Andrea
colours
consciously tried to reflect Blake's colouring, and she even tried to copy his handwriting and the writing that she's inserted into this. And so as you unfold it, you're absolutely right, full of colour, full of life, and what you're revealing with each fold you unfold, you're revealing another of the 4 Zoas, which of course in Blake's personal mythology, the Zoas are also quite complex things, but they seem to be the aspects of the human psyche, and reflect different parts of the human mind, which ultimately we should try to keep in balance. And the danger is when they become out of balance. So the 4 zoas are Tharmas, who seems to represent the kind of physical body, or at least the sort of bodily impressions of the mind. Eurism, who represents reason, the rational mind. Luva, or maybe lover, who represents the emotions we feel. And finally, and most importantly, is Urthona, who also takes the form of Los. And Los is the zoa of the imagination. And in many ways, Blake saw himself as fighting on the side of Los and the imagination.
Because Los is one of his major characters in his books, isn't he?
Absolutely, the main character in Jerusalem, who is building Golgonooza throughout the course of that poem. So once you unfold the map completely, we're now looking at, as I say, what in some ways is the reverse side. But what you see in the middle is a map of the village of Felpham in Sussex. I always thought it was pronounced Felpham, but apparently locals seem to call it Felpham, so I'm trying to do that. And Blake ultimately was a Londoner. He lived for 70 years, and he lived in London all that time, apart from just 3 years. And during those 3 years, from 1800 to 1803, he lived in this little village in Sussex, by the sea. He could see the sea from his bedroom window over beautiful fields of wheat. Unfortunately now, his cottage still survives, but you can't see the sea anymore. It's a bit more built up. But this period in Felpham was a great kind of stillness in Blake's life, and a great kind of moment of imaginative renewal. And he came back to London from Felpham full of ideas, and that was when he wrote his 2 greatest prophetic works, Milton and Jerusalem. And so what Andrea's tried to do in this map is give Felpham a sense of space. It's quite an open space in the map. It's very yellow. It's kind of sun-like, and Blake's cottage is marked with a golden sun in the centre. And you get a sense of tranquility here, and before we turn over and enter Blake's London on the other side of the map.
We should just quickly mention there's a picture on both sides of this map that if anyone wants to purchase. Two pictures for the price of one.
Absolutely, yes. Buy 2 and you can frame both. And before we turn over, I'm so sort of in awe of Andrea's artwork here. There's so many lovely details here. Like for instance, there's this red octopus over here, which in Blake's works is called the polypus. I never knew what a polypus was. I mean, of course, it just means many tentacles.
Isn't it? Yes.
And there's a line in, I think, Jerusalem saying you need to pass the polypus before you can see Golgonooza. So we're going to turn past that polypus. There are kind of starbursts and eagles. There's a dragon. And what she's managed to do brilliantly is weave texts from Blake, which I found with her. And she's managed to weave them into her artwork so they don't look superimposed or kind of separate in any way. They really blend with the style of the artwork.
And it is like his in that when he used to do his etchings, he used to have the writings with the pictures, and it does look like one of them.
Well, that's really kind of you to say. That's certainly what Andrew was aiming for.
I like this little man down here. It's like a devil jester.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, sort of rolling a huge crystal ball. I don't know exactly what everything means.
No, but this is why people have to buy the map to decipher for themselves.
Exactly. So, the other thing just to say on this, the main structure of this side is inspired by a diagram in Milton, which Blake drew, of the 4 zoas as 4 coloured circles which overlap, almost like a Venn diagram that we might draw today. And in the centre, superimposed on these overlapping circles, is an egg shape, which he calls the mundane egg. And I think this diagram kind of shows how in our human world we have elements of all 4 zoas in play at any one time. And so we've tried to kind of present a similar view on this page. So there's 4 big semicircles which overlap, and superimposed in the middle is not the mundane egg, but it's this map of Felpin.
Which looks like a glorious sun.
It does, doesn't it? Shining there in the centre. So let's turn past the polypus and over into Blake's London, or Golgonooza.
Which is just amazing. Just to look at it first, and it's like there's so much to take in.
It's really rich, isn't it? And Andrea's style is to build up an image like this, almost geologically. She'll lay down colours which have almost disappeared now. She superimposes layer after layer, and the end result is you do get this sense of just depth and details which you need to pore over to find. So to kind of sketch this out, you can see it's got a circular structure which is inspired, I think, by these medieval maps of the world which Andrea is very fond of, and I am too.
Yes, I am, because in them they normally have Jerusalem as the centre, don't they?
They absolutely do, yeah. Jerusalem at the centre. They often put east at the top. Now, the geography of Blake's Golgonooza is very confusing and quite difficult to kind of get your head around.
It's not an A to Z, is it?
It's definitely not an A to Z. So the way he describes it is, he says that north, let me get this right, I think north is in the nadir, so at the bottom, south is at the zenith. So already he's kind of flipped what we'd normally put on a map upside down. But then he says something really weird, which is that east is at the centre and west is on the circumference. And I've really struggled, but I can't get my head around what that could possibly mean.
Why would east be in the centre? Yes.
I mean,
like what's the other
it's
side
almost
of east?
as if these compass directions become locations in themselves. And anyway, we've sort of tried to approximate that by making this a circle. And again, inspired by these medieval maps, there's a few of them which present this map of the world as a giant human figure. There's particularly one which was actually destroyed in the Second World War in Germany, called the Ebstorf map, which is a map of the world but with Christ's head emerging from the top, little hands out the side and feet out at the bottom, and so it's almost like Christ is the world. And we've gone for something similar here. So Blake, quite early in his life, produced an extraordinary image called Glad Day, which is this figure of a naked boy, kind of arms thrown open wide with joy, with great kind of light coming behind him, coloured in 4 different hues. And some people think this image might be a representation of Albion, the kind of primordial human before we broke into our constituent zoas. And so Andrea's kind of superimposed a version of Glad Day onto this map. So there's a circle, there's also a sort of human figure here. There's kind of feet coming out at the bottom.
Yes. I never noticed the feet before.
Yeah,
Right, I get it.
And his hands sort of out to the side. Then of course Andrea is approaching this from a female point of view, and she felt that it was having just a man in here wasn't doing Blake justice, and so below the man, in the sort of other hemisphere of the map, we've got a female figure sitting cross-legged and reading Blake's songs, presumably of innocence and experience. And so there's a lovely sort of balance between the male face and the female figure.
There is, because I always thought that Blake had made Golgonooza to be a man and a woman, but maybe I've misunderstood something there. I thought, even though it was made by lots, it had some of Enna Farman's.
There's absolutely,
virtues, I think, inside
you're
it.
Absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and we've tried to present that here. So he describes this glorious golden kind of turreted structure called cathedron, which sounds a little bit like a cathedral, also sounds a little bit like the name Catherine, which was the name of his wife and of his mother. And it's in this golden building of cathedron that the souls of humans are woven into their kind of physical bodies. And so essentially this building is a kind of womb within Golgonooza. And so a very kind of female site. And in fact, Andrew's really gone to town with this. There's also the Gate of Luban, which is the female genitalia, and we've got that right in the centre here. This sort of
like
this
a vulva.
item, almost, it's like a vulva. It's also like an eye, and it's also the pupil of the eye is representing London stone, with Loss having curled into this map and sitting on it. So it's a very sort of nuanced centerpiece. That
Yeah, I never
detail.
noticed the curling before. I always saw it as an eye, but now I'm seeing it up close. I see all the different meanings to it.
So a few other sort of large-scale things. There's a figure of Loss in the bottom right-hand corner, next to those famous lines from Jerusalem. I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball. It will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall. And what Andrea did, again, it's so beautiful in the original, and you do get a sense of it in the map, is she actually found a golden string which was sort of woven with this golden thread, which is really shiny and beautiful. And she's actually glued it onto the map, so that Loss is holding one end of this string, and this kind of spiral comes in from the outside of a circle, into the circle, through the city, and ends at London Stone. And that's partly following Loss's route through London, which Blake is very specific about. He says from Highgate and Holloway to Hackney, through Old Stratford and Bow, this line comes in. It's also referencing, in that diagram of the four zoas we were talking about, there's a track. Blake marks Milton's track, the route that Milton takes into the world. And it's rather similar, actually, to the shape that this Loss's route takes. There's also an enormous, talking of the female elements in the city, there's an enormous rainbow stretching from the Surrey Hills to Highgate, and that's a moment in Jerusalem where Loss looks up and sees the rainbow of Enitharmon stretching all the way across London from the Surrey Hills in the far south up to the hills of Highgate.
And I've just noticed at the end of this rainbow, this side,
Yeah.
at the top, there's another eye. Is it an eye? Yes, it's
You're
an eye.
right, there is an eye, and that's because each of the four gates of Golgonooza, the four gates of Golgonooza are very weird, actually, as you might expect. They all four, there's a gate on each four corner of the city, and each gate has four doors, which seem to let you exit at all four corners of the city. So there's some sort of time-space warping going on
Like a magical
here.
portal.
There's something, yeah, there's definitely some portals going on. And each gate is associated with a sense organ. So the Golden Gate in the south is associated with the eye, and so Andrew's got this fantastic eye at the top of the map. Yeah, sort of with beams of light either coming into it or kind of emanating from it. And the other gates have a tongue, an ear, and a nose associated with them. And I think what she's done really well is, just throughout the map actually, there's places where you can sort of see some kind of city almost seeming to rise up out of this colour and confusion. There's sort of turrets, and actually when you look closely at them, they're not really anything, they're just lines, and when you step back a bit, it looks like a skyline is kind of emerging out of the city. And I think she's done that very well. She's indicated the kind of trilithons from Stonehenge, which are very present through the illustrations of Jerusalem, and Blake connected with London Stone. And there are lots of other Blakean details, like the tiger, like London as a human figure being led by a small child, like the lark's nest in the east. But what I find most fun about the map is how she's put a lot of modern locations into this mystical mix. So we've got St Paul's Cathedral here as a kind of stand-in for Cathedron, but very recognisable. We've got, in the western gate, we've got a plane taking off from Heathrow. And in the east, we've got the Millennium Dome as a kind of eye, or he's sort of transformed it into something that looks symbolic and significant. What else have we got? We've got Hyde Park here, and the V&A Museum. And actually, I should have mentioned earlier, there's a lovely mirroring of two trees which are very important when we're thinking about Blake. There's the tree of angels, which Blake saw in Peckham Rye when he was 8. He had a vision of a tree bespangled with angels. One of his earliest visions that we know of, described in his in the first biography of Blake by Alexander Gilchrist. And in fact, Andrea's slightly changed the geography here to make the mirroring work, because on the other side of the map is what Blake calls the Tree of Mystery, which is a much darker tree. It was his word for what was commonly known as Tyburn Tree, or the Tyburn Gallows, which stood at the end of the Edgware Road, on the corner of Hyde Park, just near Marble Arch today. And so as anyone approached the city from the west, they'd have got to the end of the main road into the city and seen this enormous 3-sided gibbet, which could hang up to 24 people simultaneously, and sometimes did on big show execution days. And Blake lived not far from the site of Tyburn Tree, on South Moulton Street, and he describes it as the Tree of Mystery in Jerusalem, and talks about Albion sitting nearby, placing his heel on the spot at sight of a tree, and of this tree's branches kind of growing, hitting the ground, enrooting and springing up again, and multiplying into what he calls an endless labyrinth of woe. And I think he saw this tree, this gallows, this Tyburn Tree, as a kind of epicenter of punishment, of execution, and probably of the forces of Eurism constricting energy and the creation of Golgonooza.
Which was also representing all the crime and the, well, I suppose in the way for Blake, the sadness that people were living that kind of life, and all the murders and all the robberies that people were being hung for.
Exactly, the sort of dark side of the city. And I guess just a couple of other details. Andrea's included a lovely version of Edoardo Paolozzi's sculpture of Newton, which sits outside the British Library, which is inspired, of course, by Blake's painting of Newton. Now, Blake had a complicated relationship with Newton. I think he hugely admired what Newton had done, and Newton was a huge kind of intellectual force in the 18th century. Newton was 17th century, of course. But I think Blake could never forgive him for not including a spiritual aspect to his physics. And of course, Newtonian physics is he came up with the laws of motion and of light, and he stood on the shoulders of giants and took science a huge leap forward. But Blake felt that he'd also sidelined the kind of mystic, spiritual side of life, which he felt was very disappointing. And I think actually Paolozzi's sculpture reflects that really well, because in kind of Paolozzi's style, it looks like it's bolted together. It looks like a sort of human robot version of Newton that's been bolted together, almost like a kind of mechanical machine, and it makes you question, if this is a human, where's the spirit inside this machine? Where's the God in the machine?
And that's the sculpture that's up at British
outside
Library.
the British Library, exactly. Yeah, in the plaza outside.
Because I think it's quite strange. Obviously, Newton kept all his alchemy and his mystical side very, very secret.
You're
And you
right,
think, I wonder
yeah.
what would have happened if Blake had actually known about that side of him.
Very good question.
Would
Yeah,
they
wouldn't that
become
have been fascinating?
great friends and work together on all kinds of maybe alchemical or mystical, but obviously Newton had to keep it quiet.
He had much more responsible public positions than Blake, didn't he? He was involved in the Bank of England and a professor of maths at Cambridge. But I agree. Yeah, what a shame. I mean, there could have been a great. I think Newton had died by the time Blake was born, but
I didn't realise. Right.
but they'd have had a great affinity with each other. I think.
Yeah, or maybe if Blake had known about it, he might have seen him in a different way.
Yes, exactly. Maybe a final thing to mention is that Blake hoped that the city of Jerusalem, the kind of spiritual Jerusalem, would be built again, this green and pleasant land. And actually, in Jerusalem, the epic poem, he provides quite precise sort of coordinates for where Jerusalem's going to be built, or where it has been built, and it's essentially Regent's Park. He lays out the 4 sort of coordinates, which are Primrose Hill, Marylebone, St John's Wood, and gosh, I've forgotten the other one.
Yeah, I've forgotten the other one
But
as well.
maybe it's just Islington. I can't remember. Anyway, it's 4 locations, and that's where the 4 great pillars of Jerusalem are going to be. And within that space, the golden city of Jerusalem will be rebuilt. And
Rise up over London.
And rise up over London.
Yes, that's
rise
amazing.
up over London. And so that's it.
Which is a fabulous piece of art. If someone wanted to buy this, Henry, where would they get in touch?
Well, the best place to buy it is through the Blake Society website. Which is blakesociety.org. And there's a page with publications, and this is one of those publications. And I'd also highly recommend looking up Andrea McLean's other work. She's got a fantastic website. I think there is someone else called Andrea McLean who's a kind of fashion writer, so ignore that website. But find Andrea McLean the artist, and she's got a great website with lots of her previous work uploaded, so you can view it, and it really warrants a visit. It's really stunning.
And you yourself, you do walks around London, don't you? Do you do a Blake one? I've been on that with you.
Yeah, I do a few different, mostly literary walks around London. I've done a Blake walk a couple of times, where we've quite ambitiously tried to do 4 walks in one day, each based on a different Zoa, and by walking them in one go, unite them together, as Blake was hoping would happen.
And if people wanted to know more about your walks, would they go to your website?
So my website would be the perfect place, and that's henryeliot.co.uk.
That's 1L, 1T in your Eliot.
1L, 1T. Yes, it's the same as TS, but I don't think any relation, unfortunately.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been a brilliant talk, and people have a look at the map, read Blake, and join the Blake Society. Thank you very much, Henry, and until next time, bye.
From Golgonooza, the spiritual 4-fold London eternal, in immense labours and sorrows, ever building, ever falling, through Albion's 4 forests, which overspread all the earth, from London Stone to Blackheath East, to Hounslow West, to Finchley North, to Norwood South, and the wakes of any farman's loom play lulling cadences on the winds of Albion, from Caithness in the north to Lizard Point and Dover in the south. Milton 6.